All right. Hi, my name is Rowan, and I'm the Darkroom manager. And today we're going to do a kind of intro to film guide, Film 101 as it is. And this is for people who are new to film or just want to learn more about it in general. Um, so I'm going to start off by doing a quick poll, and that is, have you done any film photography? Just so that we kind of know what we're starting with. And I can't actually see the chat when I'm in presentation mode. So Archie, I will get you to update me on what these statistics are. In the meantime, I guess we can actually get the other Darkroom members to, oh, perfect. I can see that now.
Just give it another second. Okay.
Awesome, perfect. In the meantime, I'm going to get the two other Darkroom executives that I believe are here to show themselves. We'll start with you, Juliet, and hopefully Sandy if he is here.
Hi guys, I'm Juliet. I'm one of Rowan's minions. I'm in the Darkroom on Wednesdays typically when we're in session, and I'm here to learn with you guys.
And I'm Sandy. I'm also one of the Darkroom coordinators, and I'm in on Fridays.
All right, so the rundown for tonight, so we're going to go over what film photography is, what is film, like the different types of cameras that you use, maybe how it's different from digital, where you can get started if you've never done it before, with the equipment, the costs, we're going to run down of that. And then we're going to go a little bit into the difference between film and digital for people that don't actually know the difference. And then we're going to talk a little bit about processing and editing film. And then at the end, we're just going to do a fun thing and show some of our favorite photographers. So we're going to start off with why film photography. So why would people still shoot film when digital cameras are so good? And there's a lot of different reasons that people do it. Everyone kind of has their own personal reasons. But some of the really fundamental ones that you'll hear a lot of people say is that it really teaches them the basics of photography and how to use cameras, how to interact with photography. A lot of people say that it's a lot more intentional because you're not looking at the screen constantly, and it's pretty much you and the subject more often because you don't get to interact with the camera as much. And once you take it, you can't really redo that shot. And then a lot of people talk about the delayed gratification and how that's more rewarding to take your photo and then see it days or weeks or even months later. And this also gives you a little bit of time to think about the image or the photo shoot that you did before you actually get to see the results of it. And the other thing is film can be very experimental. You can try a lot of different things with film. This is not my specialty, I would say, or my particular area of interest, but there's a lot of different things you can do with in the darkroom and even in camera to some aspect of it. And then we're going to go on to explore the different formats and how they're going to impact individuals' photography style and the way that you can think and compose images. So here are some common film cameras that you might even recognize. So the first one, which we're not really going to talk about much in this talk, is a Polaroid camera or an instant film camera. They're pretty much, I'm sure everyone knows Polaroid cameras because they're, shake it like a Polaroid picture and whatnot. But all the developing of the film actually happens in the film itself and in camera. So that's how you get an instant picture. The next one, which is really common and really easy to use, is a point and shoot camera. Also, I guess this would be in the same category as a disposable camera, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with. So these are typically autofocus, they have built-in flash, and they're compact, and they're a really great way to enter into film photography if you don't really have a lot of experience, or if a bigger, kind of more advanced camera just makes you a little bit nervous. A point and shoot, as long as it works properly, nothing can go wrong with it pretty much. because it does it all for you. So that's a really great way to like introduce yourself to film photography itself. And then we have more advanced cameras, single lens reflex cameras, so SLR cameras. These can be like, you know, Canons or Nikons, which you may be more familiar with, in 35mm format. This one, the Canon AE1, is a very, I'm sure everyone is very familiar with this camera. And then down here, there's the Hasselblad, which is a very famous camera. And this is actually a medium format camera. So it's probably a little bit out of the price range for beginners, at least, because these do run a few $1,000s, but they do produce very amazing images. And SLR cameras, there's a huge variance in the camera type, some being fully automatic, some being fully manual, some being electronic, some being pretty much just done with springs and stuff. So there's a really big variance in the SLRs themselves. And the last one that we have on the slide is a twin reflex camera, so a TLR. The difference between this and an SLR is here. There's two lenses, as you can see. The one above is actually for composing the image. So I don't know if you can see my mouse, but as light goes in, light is pretty much, they're so close to each other that they pretty much see the exact same image. So light goes in and then it reflects up to this. There's a viewing screen up here, and you can actually look into it from the top. But then what you're seeing is actually from this top lens that isn't taking the photo. And then there's a shutter in the bottom lens that takes the actual photo. So these are really interesting cameras as well. And I've only ever really seen them for medium format. And there are a whole bunch of other cameras, but these are pretty much the most common. I would totally encourage you guys to ask questions at any point. I can't see the chat. Someone will let me know or speak out, and feel free to speak out yourselves if you have a question at any point in this presentation. So then we're going to talk about the different types of film. So as I was mentioning earlier, 35mm and medium format, these are different types of film, which means they have like different dimensions. In kind of film to resolution terms, you can think of a larger film will have a better picture. They also render images differently, but we're not really going to talk about that. We're pretty much just going to mention that the bigger the film negative, the higher quality the photo will be. So a 35mm camera that has the same dimensions as a modern day digital 35mm camera. So these cameras are going to generally be the least expensive cameras and the cheapest to operate, and you get the most frames per roll of film, which is usually 36, sometimes 24. And they're always smaller cameras generally than medium format cameras. So 120, by the way, not 120mm, is also known as medium format, and this comes in a variety of dimensions. So you could get a camera that shoots 6 centimeters by 4.5 centimeters, 6 centimeters by 6 centimeters, 6 by 7, 6 by 8, or 6 by 9. So there's a really big difference, obviously, between a 6.6 camera, which takes square photographs, and say a 6 by 9 camera, which will have the same dimensions as a 35mm camera. So the thing about these is they're obviously better picture quality, but they're more expensive. The film is more expensive in terms of price per photo because there are less frames per roll. There's between 8 to 16 frames per roll. So that's one thing to think about, especially if you're a beginner. This would be a more costly route to get into. And then there's large format, which is the most expensive, and it is not recommended to beginners because it is it's 1 frame per sheet, and it's just expensive. The cameras are expensive, and you can only shoot it with a tripod, so it's a lot more cumbersome than the other two. That being said, a lot of professional photographers still use sheet film because a lot of people believe it is still better than modern day digital cameras. So up here in the top corner, we have photos of the different film types. So 35mm, you can see, is this canister that says Pro 400H. And the film negatives are, as you can see, the same size as a digital sensor, whereas this next one is a roll of 120 film. And you can see this is actually the smallest dimension of 120, so this is 6 by 4.5. But even at the smallest dimension of medium format film, it's still much bigger than 35 millimeter. So you'll get much more resolution and even actually shallower depth of field.
So there was a question. I think it was answered, but I thought we'll get your take on it. Frankie asked, what's the difference between photos taken by a single lens 120 millimeter camera versus a double 120 millimeter camera?
Oh, there's really, I mean, there isn't actually any difference really, because the only thing that second lens does is for viewing the photo. So there's one thing, I believe it's called parallax, meaning that what you're seeing isn't what the lens is actually seeing. And this happens in rangefinder cameras as well, because the rangefinder is in the top left corner and the lens isn't. So they're about maybe 2 centimeters apart, but that 2 centimeters will make a difference, as you can imagine with your phone, holding it and then moving it 2 centimeters up. So essentially it's going to have no impact, like because that second lens has nothing to do with the actual taking of the photo. It's just in preparation. So essentially, if that second lens is gone, you still can use a TLR. You just won't know how to focus it. So yeah, it won't actually have any optical kind of effect on the image. But it does also mean that you can't change lenses. So all TLRs, except for a few Mamiyas that I'm aware of, just have one single lens and it's a fixed focal length, usually around 75 to 80 millimeters. So our next thing is ISO. So ISO, if you're a digital photographer already, you're aware of. The big difference between digital and film is that you cannot change the ISO. And for those who aren't aware of what it is, it's how sensitive the film is to light. So the higher the ISO, the more sensitive it is to light. So when you use film, it's actually, of course I put it away before this, it's predetermined, and I'll grab some out actually. Okay, here is HP5 400. So HP5 plus at 400 speed. So that means the whole roll is going to be shot at ISO 400. And you can technically change this by pushing or pulling the film, but that will apply to the entire roll. Say, so for example, if I'm shooting and I have a 400 speed film in my camera and I'm thinking, oh shoot, you know, it's like, there's not enough light here. I wish I had a 1600 speed film. Technically, you can change it to a 1600 speed film by pushing it 2 stops. However, that's going to apply to every single image taken. So if you do it at the beginning, then you just have to remember, oh, shoot everything at 1600. But it does have an effect on the film itself. I've never really pushed film or pulled film much, but some people do it for an aesthetic because it definitely does provide different results. Other people do it for necessity, just because maybe they only have a 100 speed film on them, but they need to shoot indoors where there isn't enough light for 100. So it's all kind of personal preference, or if you need it, you can use it. So here is, just for those of you who maybe shoot digital but maybe don't always use manual, here's the, I guess, exposure triangle between ISO, shutter speed, and aperture. And these are in a film camera. I know in digital cameras it can get more complex, like there's other stuff in the camera that you can change. I don't own a digital camera, so I don't even really know what I'm talking about right now. But in a film camera, there are only 3 settings. There's ISO, which is set based on the film you pick, shutter speed, and aperture. And then of course you can put filters on if you'd like. But for those who aren't aware, I'll just do a really quick rundown. The higher the ISO, the more sensitive it is to light. Then shutter speed here, I guess the arrows are here for you. So you guys can even like take a snapshot of this if you want to remember, or there's lots of great tables and stuff. But then shutter speed, the longer you leave the film exposed, the brighter it'll be. And then aperture, the lower the f-stop number, the brighter the image will be, and the shallower the field of depth. And the interesting thing about medium format and large format is because it is a larger negative, the same f-stop will provide a shallower depth of field than if you were to shoot it on a 35 millimeter camera. Because of physics, I don't know why. So here's our where to start guide. So the first thing is buying a camera. You can do this on Facebook Marketplace, thrift stores, garage sales, estate sales. And my biggest recommendation is always test it at 1 second shutter speed, because a lot of people will grab something, I don't think this is loaded, and they will test it at 1/1000th of a second, and it'll sound perfect to them. And the issue with that, of course, being that 1/1000th of a second is very fast, and you won't be able to actually tell the difference between it, even if it is off. Here, I can't remember how to, here. Whereas if you test it 1 second, you'll much more easily be able to slow camera and an accurate camera. So here, I'll let you look through this if you guys want to look at my screen. So this is 1/1000th. And even a camera that's broken will probably give you something similar. And then once you start to test at lower ones, here's 1/8 of a second. You start to tell, like, oh, that's probably going to be an accurate camera. But the best way, I say, is always at 1 second. You do this. And then usually I always pull my phone out. And then I hold my phone and I kind of tap the start button on my phone at the same time I hit the shutter, and then stop it when it closes. And obviously it'll be a little bit off, but that's personal error. But because some cameras, as I'll actually show you with this one, they do, they work at a fast shutter speed. Here's 1/250th of a second. And so you test that and you think it's a working camera. Here's 1/10th of a second even. You think it's a working camera, but then once you go to 1 second, can you guys even see this? Did I get a thumbs up, Archie? Okay, perfect. And then you test it at 1 second and it stays open. So you can see, I don't know if you can see the light behind, but the lens is still open multiple seconds later. So that's why I always say the biggest and most important thing you can do is test it at 1 second. And then the other thing is a flashlight test. So where you take your phone, I'll show you guys, and you put the flashlight on the other side of it, because then you'll be able to see any visible fungus through it. So don't look at it, like if you're looking like me, don't just push it through, because that shows nothing. That just shows, because there could be something and you just could miss it. Always look at it from behind. So you can see now, I don't know if you can see it, but there is fungus in this lens. So it's a way that it really makes every kind of dust and every issue very apparent. So that's also a good way to see if there's fungus. But just also, a lot of cameras will have lots of dust inside, so don't be too weary, because to some extent it is very normal. I went way too long on that. The next place to go is to buy your film. So this is personal preference. You can buy black and white, you can buy color negative, you can buy slide film. That is totally up to you. I mean, if you buy black and white, you can come and develop in our darkroom, so there's a definite benefit to that. And then color and slide film, you can have developed other places. Obviously, you know the difference between black and white and a color film. One's black and white, one has color. Color negative is, it'll look orangey to your eye. I actually have some right here I can show you. So the images are kind of reversed. That's why it's called a negative. Whereas a slide film will actually show you the same image that the camera sees. So those are really fun to use, because then your negative is actually a positive and you can hold it up to the light and see the image. So at some point, I would definitely recommend trying that. And then the next step is developing it. So this is where you bring your film roll to the lab, and obviously you roll it back up into the canister first, and then they develop it, which means they use chemicals to have a chemical reaction on the emulsion of the film. And then it's no longer light sensitive, and you can look at it and it'll look something like these negatives here. These would be black and white negatives. And then once you've done that, you can either pay to have them scan it, or you can bring it to our PhotoSoc scanner if you're a member, and then you can scan for free in our office. So this is definitely the cost-effective way to do it. It just, if you're willing to pay, then it saves you a little bit of time, but you know, we do have a scanner that you can use for free. So that is definitely a benefit. So now we're going to get into the equipment and the cost of it. So a 35 millimeter camera can cost you anywhere from $50 up to, last year they sold one for $1 million. So that's not an exaggeration, €1 million. So, but obviously I'd recommend you guys stick closer to the $50 range. And then once you have your camera, pretty much there's batteries, but the only thing that you're gonna have to then pay for is film and developing. So roll black and white film costs between about $7 to $15. And one thing I will tell you is, for black and white especially, I use the $7 film. It's HP5 Plus. It's kind of my favorite. I don't see a reason to spend $15 on a roll when HP5 is so good. So my recommendation is buy HP5. That's the best price and quality kind of balance. And then once you have your roll, you can either develop it with us if you have a Darkroom membership, and then we don't charge anything once you have the membership. You can develop as much as you want. But if it's color film, or if you don't want to buy a membership, a Darkroom membership, then it's $5, about $5.50 at Kerrisdale, and they do offer a student discount. So just always remember that when you're paying. And then color film is between about $10 to $20. And in this, like, you can do so much research into what film you want to buy, because they're all good for a different reason. One's maybe better for portraits, one's maybe better for landscapes. Totally up to you, totally personal preference. And then once again, that's $5.50 to develop. However, if you want to develop and scan, it's usually about $20. That's pretty much the base price. You can get higher end scans for more. Or London Drugs high-end scanned is about $20. So for 35 millimeter, I honestly recommend London Drugs. It's the best, cheapest resolution quality ratio, I would say. And then we have medium format cameras. They run around $400. You can get some for about $150, but then they get quite a bit up there as well, going for a few $1,000s. But they're not recommended for beginners. And then the price is going to be actually the exact same, pretty approximately the exact same. However, you just remember you're getting, instead of getting 36 images per roll, you're maybe getting 12. So technically the price per roll goes up 3 times, but this roll still costs the same amount. So how does film differ from digital? Does anyone have anything that they want to say on this before I get going with the presentation, or any questions so far? All right. So as I said earlier, ISO is fixed, but you can push or pull film. And as I mentioned, it does apply to the whole roll. So a really basic way of thinking about film photography is, especially if you're familiar with digital, is imagine it is a digital camera, but you take the sensor out and you replace that sensor with film. It's honestly, a lot of people, for some reason, are really scared of it, or like think that they're going to mess up a bunch. But I don't know where that really comes from, because if you're a photographer, you already know everything that you need to know pretty much for film. So my biggest thing is saying, like, don't worry about it. It's all going to go fine. And if it doesn't, you can just shoot another roll. So now we're going to talk about the darkroom. This is where kind of more the traditional and interesting aspects that you can do with film that you can't do with digital. And this is, like a lot of people say, this was like the olden days PhotoSoc shoot. P.S. the Adobe thing. I can't remember what it's called. Photoshop. Yes, this is the olden days Photoshop. So our darkroom, we have 2 darkrooms. One's pretty much just a closet, and that's if you're just loading film into a canister. We can pretend that this is the canister. They're light tight canisters that are made for film developing. You'll go into the room and you'll put your film on a spool, and then you'll place your film spool in the canister, and it'll be totally light tight. And then you'll go out into the back and use our chemicals and develop your film. And then once it's all developed, you can pull it out and see it right there. It takes about 20 minutes to do all the developing with the 3 different chemicals. And long term, honestly, if you get a darkroom membership and you shoot like 2 rolls of film, you've already saved money compared to going to a traditional lab, just because you get to develop, you get to scan, and you also have a lot more control over what's happening to your film. So that's a great aspect. And then once you start shooting more than 2 rolls, pretty much you can think about like that as being free almost. It's a good way to think about it, promotional. And so it's more cost effective. And then we also have like traditional darkroom for printing, which is where it's a lot more cool. And that's probably what you'd recognize from like movies and stuff. They're with the red lights, they're safe lights. That means that these, the film paper or the photo paper here isn't sensitive to them. So you can pull them out. And then we have enlargers where you can project your negative images onto these photo paper, and then you can develop them and see it happen all in front of you. It's a really awesome experience. And I think that's kind of where you get to have the most control over your entire image. And it's just, I think it's a really great experience for teaching yourself photography and like learning a lot about it. So I definitely recommend trying our darkroom out and trying to print your images. So scanned image editing, this is personal preference. Some people don't edit their scans at all and they think it's wrong. But that being said, when you're paying for someone to scan it at the lab, they're already being edited. So, I mean, you can have your opinion on this. It's totally a personal preference. Nothing's right or wrong. Some people like to edit their scans a lot. Some people don't even like to touch them. Personal preference. In editing, you can control light, shadows, blacks, whites, pretty much the exact same in digital. The only difference is a lot of people, for some reason, think that you can make a photo that was not in focus on your negative become in focus in the darkroom or by scanning it or somehow, but that's not actually possible. So one tip we always have is to overexpose your shots. Do not underexpose, because we know that this is the opposite to shooting digital, where you're not supposed to overexpose. And now for Lightroom and Photoshop, I'm actually going to get Bren to talk about this because he knows a lot more than me about it, so I'll let him take over.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Bren Rito. It's Bren with a silent J. I'm just going to be taking over and talk about some editing things that you can or cannot do in Lightroom and Photoshop. Yeah, let's move on to the next slide.
Oh yeah, sorry, I forgot.
Yeah,
control of it still.
No problem. Yeah, so once again, my name is Bren Rito. It's my time to shine. Rowan, just press like the arrow twice. I'm just going to reiterate, different photographers have different perspectives on editing philosophy and for film photography. Some just really love their own film, and they say the film they buy for the camera has all the colors they need, or some people edit. I'm just saying, let's just like whatever is good for you guys is good for you. Don't let anyone bring you down. I'm here to shine some light on that. Yeah, so I'm just going to be going over 5 examples, 5 images, and let's see how we can change things. So, okay, so for this one, I like this photo. It's a nice vertical portrait. To me, though, it seems like it has washed out colors. So some things I can do is to play with the contrast and the colors. So adjustments, I would color grade it by strengthening the shadows, blacks and whites, while decreasing decreasing the whites to highlight and create contrast, as you can see in the image. Yep. For the next one, this one I actually really like. I didn't want to touch the colors, but it has some kind of Z zigzag motion, and I find a distracting line at the bottom left. Maybe you wouldn't even care about that, but maybe it's just me, and I'm like, I want to get rid of it. So I'm going to use a spot heal tool, which is something you'd use a lot, especially with film photography, because when you scan, you might have a lot of dust on your scans. They come out as little like white specks. So yep, with the spot heal tool, I'll just remove that line and it looks a lot better to me. For this photo, it's a black and white portrait. Once again, it looks like there's nothing wrong with it, but if you're a perfectionist or just someone who has a lot of focus issues like me, I would be like, it has washed out tones, distracting shrubbery on the left and right of the horizon line, just you can barely see. So I'll spot heal tool that, increase the shadows and the blacks while maintaining the whites. And it looks a lot better to me now. I'm like, wow, I really like this photo. Okay. Example 4, we can use a lot more stuff to work here. I'm sure you can point out at a lot of things to point and laugh at. There's that weird little squiggly thing in bottom left. On the right, there's a slight light leak that makes it look like it's getting darker. If you actually look at the lines right behind them, you can tell that it's like vertically and horizontally not perfect. So just a bunch of different things we can edit here. Spot heal tool on the dust and distracting shadow. Use a guiding line tool to straighten out the lines and to crop and to remove the distracting sides. So there you go. It looks a lot better to me now. I'm like, wow, it's way better. For this last one, I just want to reiterate that the spot heal tool, which removes dust and other things, is especially handy. I listed a lot of things here that you might not notice, but maybe to the perfectionist, you'd be like, wow. Top left light leak shadow. There's some seagulls right above at the very top of the image that just look like little black smudges. If you look really carefully at the very end of the pier, there's two men standing there. Another perfectionist stuff. Distracting white dust on the garbage can. Very tiny things. And for this edit, I just spot heal tooled everything and it just looks aesthetically pleasing to me now. But yes, so just going over it, you can edit your photos, whatever, sky's the limit. Yes. All right, I'm gonna pass it back to you now, Rowan.
So for the end, we're just going to share some of our favorite photographers, and just if you guys want to check them out, or yeah. So the first one is Alex Soth. Soth as in both, he always says. So this is one of my personal favorites, and I definitely think you guys should check him out. He does a lot of large format film photography, so he's definitely worthwhile. He doesn't really do any instructional things or anything like that, but he's a really interesting photographer if you're into that sort of fine art photography world. The next one is Nicholas J.R. White. We added him because he has a film camera right here, and he does a lot of interesting photography. We also linked their websites on the bottom so that you guys can check that out at the end of this. Really interesting guy. And he talks a lot about like how to start a project into photography, which maybe that would interest you, because obviously we're not going to touch on that really here, but it was definitely something that I would recommend. And then Joel Sternfeld, another portrait photographer. Here you can see another large format camera. So you can see maybe a trend that I've mentioned large format cameras 3 times, and that's because to this day a lot of people do think that digital cameras can't they don't even really compare to large format cameras. So that is something to think about, like, oh, why are people still shooting film? Well, because some people think it's better. The next 2 photographers we added are really good for, I would say, learning new things about photography and just especially film. So the first one is Willem Verbeek. He has a YouTube channel. I know a lot of beginners in film love his stuff. It's really information, like there's a lot of information in it, and it just kind of gets you thinking about photography and film photography in new ways maybe. So he's definitely someone that you should check out and watch his videos. They're very interesting. And then probably more well known is George Munsey from Negative Feedback. So he has his own YouTube channel, and that's actually where I found, and like these people also do a lot of interviews or like podcast kind of styles with other photographers. So it's a really great way to kind of learn about more people in that community. That's actually where I learned about Nicholas J.R. White, this guy here, because he had an interview where he talked about this Black Dots project. And I probably watched it a year ago, and I still thought like, wow, like I'm probably going to rewatch it at some point because I thought it was so interesting, and just to get his take on it. And then they do also a lot of interviews for maybe kind of new photographers that you might not hear about any other way. So definitely really good resources. And then we added 2 photos. This is from Alex Soth's, I think his earliest book, Sleeping by the Mississippi. And then this is from his most recent. I know this one's on film. I can't talk about this one, but I mean, regardless, they're still both really amazing portraits. And then both of these are from, or actually this one's from that Black Dots project I was talking about. And he talks about, these are little like houses, abandoned houses called bothies in Scotland. And they're pretty much houses that people used to own, and then at some point I guess they became abandoned, and now they're used for hikers, and they're free to access, And so he's done a big project on these bothies in Scotland, and there's a lot of great images of the Scottish landscape and portraits there. So I think that's a really interesting project, and kind of quite inspiring, actually. So definitely something great to check out. And then here's a portrait from one of his more recent projects of a hunter from a town that I cannot pronounce or remember. But anyways, another really interesting photographer that would definitely be worthwhile checking out. This, I guess, just at the end, like some fun tips. I mean, obviously this is everyone's personal preference. I usually don't shoot in the rain just because some of my cameras are maybe not so waterproof, and I always just carry my camera in my backpack, which also isn't waterproof. So that's a pretty bad reason not to do that. But also because the film I shoot is usually lower ISO, and I don't know, I just generally don't bring it with me on days that are rainy or gloomy. Also because I love natural light, especially natural light indoors, like where it's coming through windows. But all that is totally personal preference. And my last tip is just do not be scared. Treat a film camera like you would a digital camera, because they are both cameras. It's pretty much the exact same thing, just will yield different results. But if you can use a camera, then there's no reason you cannot use a film camera. I think that is the end. Yes. So does anyone have any questions or anything they want to bring up? Maybe if you're kind of don't have a camera and you wanted to know more about what type of camera you should get, or what type of film you want to get, or whatever. All right, if you don't, I don't know, there is a Discord group, or actually I should read this stuff.
I can take over if you want.
Yes, that's good,
Yeah.
because I forgot to look at this before.
No worries. I just added this. First of all, thank you, Rowan, and thank you, Bren. That was a really fantastic presentation. I learned a lot. And so we're nearing the end of today's event, but I just wanted to quickly tell you guys about our Discord server. We launched this at our last event, and it's a new addition this year. It's for you guys to stay connected with other members, share your favorite photography tips, and like learn new techniques. Ask all your photography questions on there, whether it's about film or digital. You guys can also use Instagram to DM us, or use Facebook, whatever you're most comfortable with. And you can message us execs directly using the general questions channel. We will share today's PowerPoint, so don't worry if you didn't get to take a picture of something, it'll all be there for you guys. This is the link at the bottom, but we will, William, if you could like put it into the chat, that would be great. We're gonna have a Among Us game there, led by William, who is our one of our events coordinators. So you guys can go there and play with him. And if not, you guys have any questions, I'm gonna stay back, and I think Rowan is also staying back, so you guys can ask us questions. Yeah, if not, if you guys can't stay, I think I speak for all execs when I say thank you guys so much for coming. It was really fantastic to have you guys all here, and have a very Merry Christmas, a Happy New Year, and good luck on those finals. So if anybody else wants to say anything, go ahead.
There is a question in the chat from Johnny about the developing process for black and white, C41, and E6.
So by developing process, do you mean, what exactly do you mean by that? Like the price, or how it happens, or where you can do it? Or I could just answer all of those, I guess.
I'm just prompting. That's all I'm doing.
Okay. Yeah, so developing for black and white, we can actually do it at our darkroom. That's the benefit. So the chemicals, they just have different times, but it's all the same temperature. and we can do it all at room temperature. And that's why we don't really do color film, because it's temperature, like you need it to be at a certain temperature and you need to keep it at that temperature the whole time. So typically people use specialized machines for that, which we do not have. So that's the reason that we can't do it ourselves. So that is unfortunate because a lot of people ask for it. And then C41 and E6, pretty much all the labs, except for I think London Drugs, does E6. C41 is just for any color negative film. So that's, it'll say on it, I believe. Whereas E6 is for slide film. And I'm sure I can grab something out of here to show you if you guys have never seen what we're talking about before. Oh, here. So E6 means it is a slide. So instead of it being a negative, it's a positive. So for example, this, I'll just put a light behind this, or I guess that's probably good enough. So I don't know if you guys can see, I'll make it so I can see my camera. So these would be slides. So usually when it's a consistent light behind, wow, that's bad. Here. There. So you can see it's an image that you see through it. And that's what E6 is for these slide film. And it is a little bit more expensive, but obviously it's an archive that you can keep and look at forever. But yeah, I don't know about the difference in chemical processes besides the requirement of specific temperatures and machines for color film.
Can I ask Johnny about it? About the processes for C41 and E6, if you know how? Quite curious.
Just give me a sec. I'm taking apart a lens. I just gotta put it down somewhere.
I do have a follow-up question. Why would someone choose like C41 versus like E6? Because like E6, I know it takes like $30 to develop, but then like there's
it only costs, I think, $5 more.
London Drugs is $18 for. I work at London Drugs. London Drugs is $18 for E6, and it gets shipped out to Saskatchewan.
Yeah. So I'm sorry, Johnny. I wouldn't recommend going to London Drugs for E6 just because obviously they don't do it in house. But as I said earlier, shout out to London Drugs. I do get my 35mm film developed and scanned there because for the same resolution elsewhere, it's actually quite a bit more. I don't know if that's just a volume thing or because they have alternative income or whatever. But the reason you pick E6 is it has a lower dynamic range. So that means like on a color negative film, for example, if you shoot, or even black and white, if you shoot HP5 at like HP5 that's ISO 400 at ISO 50, you're still actually going to retain a lot of the detail in the highlights, which is pretty uncommon for example, in a digital camera. I'm sure that's totally impossible. But then the same kind of theory applies to a color negative, is that you can retain a lot of information in the shadows and in the highlights, whereas on a slide film, the highlights blow out and the shadows become just totally black a lot faster. So I think people say like 6 stops dynamic range for slide film. I mean, don't quote me on that because I'm not sure, but I do know that it is a lot less than color negative. The one thing, and this is obviously a personal preference for people, is that a slide film, that is something that'll last forever. Like, you know, for example, I don't know, let's say when you die and your kids are looking at your stuff. Yes, Bren, that surprise face, one day you will die, I'm sorry. But for example, I don't know, they will always be able to look at that. Someone in, 20 years will be able to look at this. Maybe your slide is still there, but your digital file got deleted. If they're looking at the slide, unless they're like, look at these things all the time, they won't really be able to see the image. So that's the one real big benefit with E6, is it is, for archival purposes, it is something that's very tangible. It's the same thing as getting a print. It's something that you can hold and have forever. So I mean, people would actually maybe decide to do that for certain reasons in certain projects, maybe because they like that aspect to it. But I guess the higher dynamic range would be why higher dynamic range and shorter cost. Also, shooting large format, it's actually not even more expensive. They develop it for the same price as a color negative. So shout out to that.
Okay, there we go. Okay. Yeah, sorry. So to answer your question, yeah, so yeah, there's E6, there's C41, and then there's black and white. So black and white, there's many different types of chemicals for black and white. There's 8C110, D76, Dectol, that's all Kodak. And then there is Ilford stuff, which is DDX, Ilfotec, Ilfosol, and they're all just different chemicals that all develop black and white film. And there's many different ways of mixing them and timing them for push and pull developing or different times. Then after you develop, you use a stop bath, and then you fix. Which fixing is, how do you explain it? I wasn't expecting to explain developing.
No, like what's the difference between like developing like between like the black and white and like the color?
The biggest difference is time versus temperature. If I were to categorize it, black and white is time sensitive and color is temperature sensitive. For example, if you shoot Ilford HP5 at 400 HP5 at 400 and you use like, let's say DDX, Ilford DDX, then that's a development time of, I think that's 5 minutes. I don't have it memorized, but I think it's 5 minutes or 9 minutes. But then if you do, let's say Ilford Delta 100, that's going to be 7 to 5 minutes. Likewise, for C41, you can put a medium format roll, a large format roll, and then like 2 regular C41 rolls, all different ISOs, and you can develop it in one go, as long as you keep the temperature. That's the big difference there. E6 is just E6. E6, we don't recommend home developing E6.
Would you say that like black and white or C41, like would you say that C41 is harder or?
I'd say C41 is harder because of temperature. A lot of people say black and white's harder, but it's really easy to, do it. Like you don't need to sit in a water bath. You don't need to use a jobo. You don't need special heaters. It's just only like kind of room temperature, and you just kind of keep time of developing. So that's why when I started doing film, we were taught on black and white first, then we did color, and then we did E6.
Interesting. Only ever done black and white. So
I don't know. Okay, so where I'm from, there's Dawn's Photo, and they sell Cinestill C41 kits, so you can do it at home. There's many darkrooms or many photo labs sell black and white chemicals because it's so prevalent, but you can usually find smaller batch C41 kits. Even if you look hard enough, you can find E6 kits, which are really hard to develop and to buy. But it's worth it, I think, because the Cinestill kit is $20, $25 here, Canadian, and you can process around 40 something rolls. So like the price per roll is very good. But likewise, film here is extremely cheap compared to you guys. I feel really bad for your guys' film prices there.
Don't feel bad. You're gonna help us later. Like
Rowan, I guess to fill you in, I'm the University of Manitoba.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I was thinking, because I was like, why would we ship it off to Calgary? Like,
Saskatchewan.
No, it still gets shipped off. No, so everything from BC to Manitoba, E6 gets shipped off to Saskatchewan. That's why. Because Store 33 is the only store that has the E6 developing kit.
Really? Because I think I don't know. They processed my E6 in about, I think, 3 days. So I don't know. I just assumed it was done in-house because that would be very fast to ship. But when you were saying that, I was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, it just didn't make sense to me, as in, like, why would Vancouver do something? But yes, and I was like, I don't recognize this person, and why are they the beginner thing? But now I totally get it. I remember them talking about you. I just wasn't able to come to any of the other meetings.
No, no worries. Nice meeting you. Nice to see a good fellow film shooter. Fun fact: your black and white film gets sent here. So
Really?
yeah. So if you ever send black and white film, I'm gonna look out for your names whenever I check them in.
Well,
Yeah.
you didn't, because you should just do it at our dark room.
Exactly. That's the thing, right? Like, yeah, for developing black and white is costs more than E6. It's insane. It doesn't make
Really?
sense. Yeah.
That's so weird.
It's like the easiest one to do, in my
that's,
opinion.
Everything's backwards. Gosh.
Yeah, especially, I mean, because it costs even more to have E6 done than
Yeah.
it was.
So in here, did you ever buy the bulk roll of HP5?
We did with Kentmere.
Kenmere. For HP5 here, it cost us 80 something. 80 bucks for a bulk roll of HP5. And then HP5 here is like $5, $4. Like
What?
Like this, I bought this I bought this before our lockdown. This is $6.29 with tax. Like that's with tax.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, ours was, I mean, when I bought mine, I think it was just over 7. So.
Oh yeah, I think it's because I don't know. I think it's because our film scene's pretty big here. I don't know why it's so cheap here. I mean, I'm not complaining, but yeah, and then it's just worth just to develop at home at this point. Yeah. Oh, you guys used to sell film? I'm reading the chat.
Yeah, we used to sell Kentmere 400, but I mean, with the amount of people that are actually coming in right now, we're not really so much. But yeah, no, HP5 didn't really make a whole bunch of sense to bulk roll and sell just because a lot smaller profit margins.
Yeah.
And then we'd have to sell it for pretty much what they sell it for at the store. So
when we used to have a darkroom, we sold HP5, Kentmere, Delta 100. We used to have Superior as well for on bulk. But I don't think
really, and so they interesting. I've never seen Superior sold bulk before.
Did we? Yeah, me too. At the club, I saw it once, and then someone else was selling a bunch. Someone was selling like 10 rolls of bulk for like $100 each, and it was gone immediately. Like it was on Facebook or it was on Kijiji for like a day, and then by the time I woke up, 6 of the rolls were already gone, and then by the time I messaged them in the evening, it was all gone already. So that was
I think that's a story that happens, unfortunately, much too often. Having something on Craigslist go before you can get to it.
Yeah, it's rough. I have a bot that scrapes for cameras. That's why.
I just go on every day and type, "Oh, Mamiya."
Yeah,
money.
Yeah.
But I guess
what's in your film collection? What's your cameras?
I have it right here. And I just put up photos. This is the first time I've decorated my room in a few years. But right now, my favorite, it's a Bronica SQ.
It's a 6x6?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
They had a GS1 and I was like, oh, I'll get the Bronica SQ and the GS1.
Mm-hmm.
But then that was one of those stories of someone beats you to it on Craigslist. But I love it because the grip, you can put a grip on the right side instead of the left. Mamiya and Hasselblad do the grip on the left, which doesn't make sense to me because every camera you shoot on the right.
Exactly, right, yeah.
With the left, so yeah, so that's just blows my mind. But then Bronica, and it has, I love this. I can show you. To forward it, it has this.
Oh, it's a thumb winder.
Yeah,
it's
and
no,
it
it's
just
not
feels like so natural to go to. So I love it.
That's good. You only have medium format, or what was that 35 that you were showing? I was trying to read the. That
was the one. I have 2 FE2s because I love them, and then I can do black and white in one, color in the other, and then a Nikon F1, and others that are meant to be sold. Anyways, I think we can continue talking about this, but I'm sure there are some people that are itching to play.
Oh yeah, sure.
So we'll let those people go before I guess we
catch up in film. If you want to catch up in film too, we'll probably be talking about film for a while.
Does someone, I don't know how the among us get started, but does someone want to start that? I think we put William on it.
Yeah, so William, can you just maybe put the link in once again? I mean, you guys can just scroll up in the chat and it's there. And you guys can head on to the Discord channel and William will get you guys started if anybody's interested.
All right.
And I think with that, I'll stop the recording.